Hello and welcome to our presentation on Sensory Street. We will be discussing the sensory experiences of autistic people in public places.
This talk today will be delivered by two members of the Sensory Street research team. I'm Dr. Karen McLennan and I'm currently working as a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Reading. I'm a non-autistic autism researcher and I primarily study sensory reactivity and mental health.
My name is Emily and I'm an illustrator, graphic designer and podcaster creating work online at 21 and Sensory across social media. I am a research assistant on the Sensory Street project. I have sensory processing disorder, which I was diagnosed with age 8, and I am autistic, diagnosed age 25. Now I'm going to talk about the background to our research. While members of the autism community are all too aware of the importance of sensory processing differences, people without autism-specific training or expertise may be unaware of the effects that sensory processing differences have on everyday life. Sensory processing differences are part of what makes the world disabling for autistic people and can impact family life, education, and mental health. For example, on the right, my illustration shows the enabling and disabling elements when it comes to sight and visual processing. Some visual input can bring real joy, whereas others can be really overwhelming and disorientating. The sensory environment can make it difficult for myself and other autistic individuals to access public spaces. Literary accounts have highlighted experiences of being excluded and made to feel uncomfortable in spaces, and qualitative research has shown that certain places are overwhelming and so avoided by autistic people, such as large shops, hospitals, and cinemas. But so far, there has been minimal research examining the autistic experience of sensory environments, particularly related to public places.
So, the first aim of our research was to examine the types of public places that autistic adults experience as either disabling or enabling due to the sensory environment. Second, we wanted to identify principles that underlie whether sensory environments are experienced as disabling or enabling. And third, we wanted to examine how these principles are reflected in the public places that autistic adults commonly find to be disabling.
It's very important to create awareness of sensory processing difficulties, as they are a key part of what makes the world quite a disabling and uninviting place for autistic people.
We conducted a qualitative research study that was co-produced with members of the autistic community, and we conducted a series of online focus groups that allowed individuals to communicate using typed or spoken language. We recruited 24 autistic adults aged between 18 and 44. They were predominantly female, and they also reported to have a wide range of mental health conditions, with the most prominent being anxiety and depression. Firstly, we conducted content analysis, whereby you create categories of words or phrases that share meaning. And from this, we were able to identify common environments that autistic adults experience as disabling or enabling.
The top 6 disabling sensory environments we found were supermarkets, high street/centres, retail shops/centres, public transport, eateries, and healthcare settings. One of our participants said, "My local supermarket. I've gone there for like 7 years and they've never changed the layout. A couple of weeks ago, they completely changed the layout. And I went in and I just walked straight out. There's all the things, sensory things in a supermarket, the noises, the air conditioning, the cold fridges, but you can manage that when you know what's coming and it's easier."
The most commonly identified enabling sensory environments were stadiums, retail shops, cinemas and theatres, live music venues or clubs, museums, and outdoor spaces.
Another participant said, "I love going to bookshops. They tend to be quite quiet, and particularly ones where the shelves are all quite spaced out from each other, so you're not kind of crammed in against other people."
We then conducted reflexive thematic analysis, whereby you develop themes and sub-themes from trends in the data. From this, we were able to identify principles that underlie whether sensory environments are experienced as disabling or enabling. Through this analysis, we developed 6 main themes with 15 sub-themes. Informed by the data, as well as feedback from the autistic community, we've represented these themes as an interconnected web, which was expertly designed by Emily. The outer edge of the web represents the more disabling end of the dimension, whereas closer to the centre of the web represents the more enabling end.
A participant said, "It's like a multitude of things. I always envisage it as a big spiderweb of things that might affect me in a sensory environment. It's about actually looking at all those little things that build up, being able to reduce those little things as well."
The first principle we developed was related to the sensory landscape, or what we've called the sensory scape. Disabling environments were often talked about as having high sensory burdens, such as multisensory input or very aversive sensory input. But also, this input is often sustained and inescapable, and individuals have very little control over the sensory input. The second principle was space. Disabling environments were often talked about as being busy and crowded, but also that they often had quite confined built environments. For example, supermarkets having quite high, narrow aisles. The third principle was related to predictability. Disabling environments were often talked about as having a lack of available information to be able to plan, as well as them being inconsistent and unfamiliar, and often they presented with a lot of uncertainty.
Understanding. Throughout our focus groups, people reported that staff in public places lacked knowledge of sensory processing differences and autism. This led to individuals facing misunderstanding, judgment, and stigma from staff and members of the public. Adjustments. People in our focus groups identified that the lack of suitable adjustments can make places with challenging sensory environments more inaccessible. They described the importance of enabling an individual's communication needs and preferences, and being able to reduce the pressure and pace of interactions. Recovery. Across our focus groups, people identified the importance of having time to recover from more challenging sensory environments. This included being able to take breaks away from overwhelming sensory input to recover and prepare, and the need for designated spaces in public places to escape from sensory input.
Throughout this project, we also engaged with the autistic community on our social media channels. We analysed the responses to a series of posts asking very similar questions to our focus groups. We found a lot of similarities in the places that were reported to be disabling and enabling for autistic people, but also many of the principles were represented in people's responses to our posts.
Our work communicates how and why certain sensory environments are disabling or enabling for autistic individuals. The result can inform improvements to public places to make them more enabling and accessible, design standards and policy change.
If you would like to learn more about our project, you can visit our website at sensorystreet.uk. You can also scan the QR code to read the preprint of our research. You can also find us on Instagram and Twitter at SensoryStreet.
If you'd like to find out a bit more about me, I host and run the 21 and Sensory podcast. It's available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you usually get your podcasts, and I chat to neurodiverse people from all walks of life, including some fab authors, actors, influencers, artists and speakers, to name a few. I also enjoy discussing and drawing about my life as a sensory being across social media at 21 and Sensory.
We would like to finish by giving a shout out to the wider Sensory Street project team, including Kathy Manning, the principal investigator, as well as Becky, Catherine, Brett, Jess and Ravine. We would also like to thank everybody who has given feedback on this project, and also the participants and people who engaged with our social media. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to your questions in the panel discussion.